Chapter 1. Dinner and a Dangerous Realization. At 7 o'clock on Friday evening, David Bryant stood in his kitchen with flour on his hands, tomato sauce on his forearm, and absolutely no desire to be anywhere else. Some people spent their Fridays at bars. Some spent them sprawled on couches binge-watching television. David spent his making pasta from scratch. The dough rested beneath a towel while the lasagna baked in the oven, filling the apartment with the rich smell of garlic, basil, and bubbling cheese. 2 golden loaves of sourdough cooled on a rack beside the stove. A bowl of homemade garlic butter waited nearby, while a large salad sat in the refrigerator beside a jar of Italian dressing he had mixed earlier that afternoon. The kitchen looked like a comfortable disaster. David loved every second of it. He checked the lasagna through the oven door and smiled. Perfect. His grandmother would have approved. The thought brought a grin to his face. When he was 8 years old, Grandma Bryant had handed him a wooden spoon and declared that any fool could follow a recipe. But real cooks understood why the recipe worked. That had started a lifelong obsession. Over the years, she'd taught him everything she knew. Sauces, breads, soups, meats, pastries. If it could be cooked, she'd stood beside him and explained it. She'd also taught him something else. Cooking was love that people could taste. David still heard her voice sometimes while he worked. If you're not covered in flour, you're not committed. Butter isn't a problem. It's a solution. Garlic should be measured with your heart, not a spoon. She'd had many opinions. Most involved garlic. David pulled the lasagna from the oven and set it on the stovetop. The pan was enormous. He stared at it, then at the bread, then at the salad, then back at the lasagna. There was enough food here to survive a small apocalypse. Well, he said aloud, I may have overdone it. Again, not that he minded. Cooking was half the fun. Eating was secondary. He washed his hands and pulled out his phone. There was only one person he'd call for an emergency food situation. Mary. He pressed her contact and waited. She answered on the second ring. Hello, David. You busy? There was a brief pause. That's not suspicious at all. He laughed. It wasn't meant to be. Aha. I need information. That sounds even more suspicious. Mary. David. He shook his head. Despite knowing her for 25 years, she still managed to be impossible. What are you doing? I'm hanging out. Doing what? I'm talking to Jackie. Oh. Mary's friend Jackie had been around more frequently lately. David had met her a handful of times and she seemed nice enough. Why? David glanced toward the mountain of food occupying his kitchen. I accidentally made too much dinner. Mary immediately laughed. Again. Maybe. This isn't a surprise anymore. I know. How much food are we talking? David looked around. Realistically, yes, 3 people. She burst out laughing. David, that's not an accident. It absolutely is. You handmade everything, didn't you? Maybe. You definitely did. He chose not to argue. The evidence was overwhelming. Mary's voice softened. What's on the menu? Lasagna. Sounds good. Sourdough. Very good. Salad. Healthy. Impressive. Key lime pie. A dramatic silence followed. David. Mary. I love you. He rolled his eyes toward the ceiling. And that's why we're friends. Because you make pie? Exactly. That's fair. She hesitated. I'd love to come over, but Jackie is still here. David looked once more at the lasagna that could easily feed a rugby team. Bring her. What? Bring Jackie. Really? There's enough food for both of you. You sure? I'm standing in front of enough carbohydrates to qualify as infrastructure. Mary laughed so hard she snorted. That only made David laugh too. Okay, she said. We'll come. The lasagna needs another hour before serving. Got it. You still have the spare key? I've had the spare key for 10 years, right? Should I knock? No point. I'll probably be zoned out in the kitchen. You mean speaking fluent garlic again? It has a rich vocabulary. See you soon, chef. The call ended. David slipped the phone into his pocket and returned to work. An hour later, he was plating salad when the apartment door opened. We're here, Mary called. In the kitchen. Footsteps crossed the apartment. David glanced up. Mary entered first. Some things simply never changed. She had the same warm brown eyes she'd had since childhood. The same smile. The same easy confidence. Behind her came Jackie. The blonde woman stopped halfway into the kitchen and looked around. Then she looked around again. Then a third time. What? David asked. Jackie pointed dramatically. Is this all real? David blinked. The kitchen. The food. Yes. The bread is homemade. Yes. The dressing. Yes. The pie. Yes. The pasta. He hesitated. Jackie's eyes widened. You made the pasta? David shrugged. It wasn't difficult. Both women stared at him. It absolutely was, Jackie said. Mary folded her arms. I've been telling people this for years. Why doesn't he work in a restaurant? Jackie asked. David laughed immediately. I enjoy sleeping occasionally. Jackie looked unconvinced. Dinner started with salad, then bread, then another basket of bread. Conversation flowed easily. Mary and Jackie traded stories while David listened and occasionally contributed. The Merlot he'd selected paired nicely with the meal. When the bread disappeared entirely, David disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, he returned carrying the lasagna. Jackie actually sat straighter. Oh my God! David carefully set the pan on the table and cut generous portions. The layers held perfectly. Fresh pasta, sauce, cheese, more pasta, more sauce, more cheese. A balance he had spent years refining. After plating the servings, he finished each with freshly grated Parmesan. Okay, Jackie said. This is ridiculous. That's generally the response. Mary took her first bite. Her eyes closed. You're a show-off. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. It felt like one. She pointed her fork at him. You know exactly what you're doing. Correct. Jackie was too busy eating to participate. When she finally spoke, it was only because she'd finished chewing. This might be the best lasagna I've ever had. David smiled. Compliments never got old. Not because he needed praise, because feedback mattered. Every meal was another experiment, another chance to improve, another chance to create something worth sharing. You really like it? Jackie looked horrified. Did you just ask me that after watching me inhale 2 pounds of food? Mary nodded. He asks everyone. Seriously. Every time. David ignored them both. By the time key lime pie appeared, all three were more than full. That didn't stop them. Dessert never counted. That was practically science, at least according to Grandma Bryant. The pie disappeared almost as quickly as the lasagna. For nearly 2 hours, the conversation drifted comfortably from topic to topic. Movies, neighbors, old memories, bad dates, funny family stories. When Jackie learned about the boyfriend who had once tried to punch David out of jealousy, she nearly choked laughing. Wait, she said. He actually thought you were trying to steal Mary? David nodded. He was very committed to the theory. It took everyone laughing before he realized we were just friends. Mary shook her head. He lasted 6 more weeks. Month and a half. You remember? He accused me of being the villain. I remember. Jackie laughed again. You two really have known each other forever. Since we were 3, Mary said. David nodded. Practically siblings. Without the property damage, Mary added. Mostly. Eventually the evening wound down. David packaged leftovers into containers and handed them out despite weak protests. The protests stopped when everyone remembered how good the food had been. At the door, Jackie held up her container. Thank you for dinner. You're welcome. No, seriously. That was incredible. A little embarrassed, David rubbed the back of his neck. Glad you enjoyed it. Mary smiled. I'll call you tomorrow. Drive safe. We always do. A few minutes later, the apartment fell quiet. David locked the door and returned to the kitchen. Dirty dishes covered nearly every available surface. The sight made him smile. Good meals were supposed to leave evidence. As he started cleaning, a feeling of contentment settled over him. The evening had been simple. No expectations. No drama. Good food. Good company. Good friends. For David Bryant, that was more than enough. Across town, however, Mary was discovering that something unexpected had followed them home. As she drove, Jackie talked, and talked, and talked some more, almost entirely about David Bryant. For the first time in her life, Mary felt something she didn't recognize. Something uncomfortable. Something possessive. Something frightening. And with every word Jackie said, that feeling only grew stronger. Chapter 2. Everybody knew except Mary. Mary spent most of the drive back to her apartment trying very hard not to think about David Bryant. Unfortunately, Jackie made that impossible. I still can't believe that lasagna. Mary kept her eyes on the road. It was pretty good. Pretty good. Jackie turned in the passenger seat. Mary, that man committed acts of wizardry in a baking dish. Mary laughed despite herself. He's always cooked. Since when? Forever. Seriously. As long as I've known him. Jackie shook her head. No, that's not normal. What isn't? Him. Mary groaned. Here we go. I'm serious. Jackie started counting on her fingers. He's funny. Mary nodded. Sure. He's kind. True. He owns more spices than most grocery stores. Also true. He made fresh pasta. Mary smiled. Yes. He listens when people talk. Aha. He didn't spend the entire evening trying to impress anyone. That's David. Jackie stared out the window. He's attractive too. Mary nearly missed a turn. The comment landed harder than she expected. He looks fine. Jackie looked at her. Fine. He looks like David. That's not an answer. Mary tightened her grip on the steering wheel. What's with the interrogation? Jackie grinned. Oh. What? Oh, that's interesting. What is? Nothing. Mary narrowed her eyes. Jackie laughed. Then she casually dropped a grenade into the conversation. You know, I'd like to see him again. Something twisted uncomfortably inside Mary's chest. It wasn't pain. It wasn't anger. It was something far more unsettling. The sudden realization that the possibility bothered her. A lot. Oh, she managed. Jackie didn't seem to notice. I'm not saying anything serious. Mary nodded. Okay. But if a guy like that asked me out, I'd definitely say yes. The uncomfortable feeling got worse. For the rest of the drive, Mary listened while Jackie talked about David. His cooking, his personality, his sense of humor, his patience, his thoughtfulness. The more Jackie spoke, the more defensive Mary became. Not outwardly, internally. Every compliment felt oddly personal, almost possessive, as though Jackie was talking about something that belonged to Mary. That thought immediately horrified her. David wasn't hers. He was her friend, her best friend, had always been her best friend. That was all. So why did the idea of Jackie dating him make her stomach hurt? By the time she dropped Jackie off at her apartment, Mary felt thoroughly confused. The feeling only got worse as she drove home alone. Because without conversation to distract her, thoughts started filling the silence. David laughing, David cooking, David telling terrible jokes, David showing up whenever she needed him, David helping her move apartments, David fixing her flat tire, David bringing her soup when she got sick, David helping her paint her living room, David sitting beside her after bad breakups, David, David, David. By the time she parked outside her apartment building, she had a headache. Wonderful, she muttered. She didn't go inside. Instead, she started the car again. 20 minutes later, she was pulling into her parents' driveway. The lights were still on. Good. If anyone could help sort out whatever this was, it would be them. Her mother opened the door before Mary even knocked. Hi, sweetheart. Do you have a minute? Her mother immediately stepped aside. That tone never meant anything simple. Mary found both parents in the living room. Her father looked up from a baseball game. Everything okay? I don't know. That got his attention. Mary collapsed onto the couch. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then her mother sat beside her. What's wrong? Mary blew out a breath. I think something's wrong with me. Her father frowned. That's rarely a good opening sentence. She ignored him. Jackie likes David. Both parents stared. Then her father nodded. Okay. Her mother nodded too. Good choice. Mary blinked. What? He's a nice young man, her mother said. Her father shrugged. Smart, responsible, polite. I know who David is. Then what's the problem? Mary opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't like hearing it. The room became very quiet. A smile appeared on her mother's face, then another on her father's. Mary noticed both immediately. No. Neither spoke. No. The smiles grew larger. Stop that. Her father failed spectacularly at suppressing a laugh. Oh my God. Mary pointed at him. Don't you start. Sweet mercy, that had been the wrong thing to say. Now both of them were laughing. What is so funny? Her mother wiped away tears. I was wondering when this day would happen. Mary stared. What day? The day you finally figured it out. Figured what out? Her parents exchanged a glance. The kind that usually preceded parental nonsense. Her father spoke first. Honey, everyone thought you'd end up together. Mary stared. Who? Everybody. That's ridiculous. It really isn't. It is. Her mother laughed. No, sweetheart. It really isn't. Mary looked from one parent to the other. Surely they were exaggerating. Everybody? Her father nodded. Pretty much. That's impossible. It's not. No. Mary. She groaned. This is crazy. Maybe. Her father leaned back in his chair. But it doesn't make it wrong. Her mother smiled. You've been attached at the hip since preschool. We were friends. Yes. We are friends. Also yes. And that's all. Neither parent responded immediately. That silence was somehow worse. Then her father casually said the sentence that shattered her world. You know that boy's been in love with you for years. Mary laughed. A single loud laugh. Because the alternative was accepting that statement. That's nonsense. Her father's expression didn't change. Okay. Her mother looked equally unconvinced by Mary's denial. He never said that. No. He never asked me out. No. He never. Mary. Her mother interrupted gently. You really didn't know? The amusement had vanished from her voice. Now she sounded genuinely surprised. Mary looked around the room. Neither parent appeared to be joking anymore. A very uncomfortable feeling settled over her. What do you mean? Her mother shook her head. Oh honey. No. Her father laughed softly. She really didn't. You all keep saying things like that. Because it's true. Mary folded her arms. If David was in love with me, I would have noticed. Both parents immediately burst out laughing again. Her father pointed at her. That's the funniest thing you've said tonight. She sank deeper into the couch. This was becoming a nightmare. After another half-hour of conversation, Mary finally escaped. Unfortunately, she left with more questions than answers, because the certainty in her parents' voices had been impossible to ignore. Neither of them had hesitated. Neither had doubted themselves. Neither seemed remotely surprised. They genuinely believed David had loved her for years. The possibility followed her home, into bed, through Saturday, into Sunday, and then into the following week. At first she resisted the idea. Then she started examining memories, just to prove everyone wrong. That plan backfired almost immediately, because suddenly she remembered things, small things, a lot of small things. David being the first person to volunteer whenever she needed help. David remembering details everyone else forgot. David somehow knowing when she was upset before she said anything. David driving 2 hours through a snowstorm because her car broke down during college. David showing up to every birthday, every graduation, every important event, just because he wanted to be there. The more memories she reviewed, the worse things became, because she couldn't find a single example of David ever expecting anything in return. He simply showed up, again, and again, and again, like gravity, reliable, constant, steady. One evening she found herself sitting alone on her couch staring into space. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. She was 16. Her grandmother had died. She remembered crying so hard she couldn't speak. The doorbell had rung. David had stood outside. Neither of them had spoken. He had simply sat beside her for 3 hours, not talking, not asking questions, just being there. At the time she'd considered it normal. Now she wasn't so sure. Because how many people actually did things like that? How many people stayed? How many people chose to stay for years? For decades? The answer was frighteningly simple. Only David. Mary pressed a hand against her forehead. Oh no! The realization hit harder every day. Not because she believed her parents entirely. Not yet. But because she was beginning to see David differently. And that was the truly dangerous part. For 25 years, he'd been the constant background presence in her life. Now she was actually looking at him. Really looking. And she was starting to notice things she'd somehow missed. His kindness. His patience. His humor. His loyalty. The way he quietly took care of people. Most terrifying of all, she realized she genuinely couldn't imagine her life without him. That thought scared her more than anything. Because for the first time she found herself wondering what would happen if somebody else came along. Somebody like Jackie. Somebody who saw exactly what Mary was only now beginning to understand. And when that thought settled into her mind, one truth became impossible to ignore. The idea of losing David hurt. A lot. Far more than a friendship should. And Mary was beginning to suspect there was a reason for that. Chapter 3, The Worst Detective in History. Mary Stoen had always considered herself a reasonably intelligent woman. She had graduated college with honors. She managed difficult projects at work. She could assemble furniture without crying. Most importantly, she could usually identify her own emotions. Usually. This situation was proving to be an exception. 3 days after her conversation with her parents, she found herself sitting across from David at their favorite diner, conducting what she privately referred to as an investigation. Unfortunately, she was terrible at it. David looked up from his burger. Why are you staring at me? I'm not. You absolutely are. Mary grabbed a French fry. I was thinking. About. Things. David nodded slowly. That's concerning. She threw a fry at him. He caught it. Actually caught it. Without looking. Then ate it. You didn't even see that. 25 years of practice. That's ridiculous. Maybe. His grin appeared. The same grin that had existed for most of her life. The grin she'd never paid much attention to until recently. Now she noticed everything, which was becoming a problem. A giant problem. An infuriating problem. Because David hadn't changed. She had. Dad says hi. David looked up. Your dad still owe me $20? He says that debt is legally forgiven. He says many things. Mary laughed despite herself. It had always been easy with David. Conversation never required effort. Silences weren't awkward. Nothing felt forced. She'd never appreciated how unusual that was. Now she was beginning to. And every realization seemed determined to make her life harder. David pointed at her. There. What? You did it again. Did what? That thing where you stare through my skull. Mary looked away. I am not staring. You are. I was thinking. About my forehead? Oh, be quiet. David chuckled. Then, like the oblivious man he was, he went right back to eating. Mary wanted to scream. How was he this calm? If he was secretly in love with her, as her parents claimed, shouldn't he be acting differently? Shouldn't there be signs? Signals? Something? Instead, he was discussing burger toppings. By the end of lunch, Mary was no closer to understanding anything. She left more confused than when she'd arrived, which was impressive, because she'd already been extremely confused. That Saturday afternoon, Jackie called. The moment Mary's phone displayed her name, she felt nervous. That probably should have been a clue. Hello. Hey. Hey. A pause. Then Jackie asked casually, so what's David doing today? Mary immediately hated the question, which was another clue. Why? Oh, I don't know. The lie was spectacularly obvious. Mary sighed. Jackie. What? You sound like a teenager. Jackie laughed. Fine. There it is. He was interesting. Mary's stomach tightened. Interesting. The word sounded harmless. It wasn't. Interesting led to coffee. Coffee led to dates. Dates led to relationships. Relationships led to nope. Mary didn't like that train of thought. Not one bit. You know, Jackie continued, if I didn't know better, I'd think he was hiding from women. Mary almost laughed. David wasn't hiding. He simply wasn't looking. Most of his free time involved cooking, recipe books, grocery stores, or experimenting in his kitchen. Dating always seemed low on his list of priorities. He isn't hiding. Then why is he single? Good question. Jackie hummed thoughtfully. You've known him forever. I have. Has he always been like that? Mary considered it. Mostly. Mostly. He gets excited about weird things. What kind of weird things? Mary smiled despite herself. Kitchen tools. Jackie burst out laughing. No. Absolutely. You're joking. He once spent 45 minutes explaining the advantages of a specific whisk. Jackie laughed harder. Oh my God. It was actually impressive. The words escaped before she could stop them. Jackie was quiet for a moment. See? What? You do that. Do what? You smile whenever you talk about him. Mary froze. There was a long silence. Then Jackie laughed softly. Never mind. No, what does that mean? Nothing. Jackie. Nothing. The conversation shifted topics, but the comment stayed lodged firmly in Mary's brain. You smile whenever you talk about him. That couldn't mean anything, could it? The following week did not improve matters. If anything, things became worse. Mary started noticing David everywhere. Not physically, mentally. A commercial mentioned Italian food and she thought of David. She walked past a bakery and thought of David. She heard someone tell a terrible joke and immediately thought of David. It was as though her brain had suddenly become obsessed. By Thursday, she was officially annoyed with herself. That evening, she stopped by David's apartment. The spare key still worked. It always worked. She let herself inside. The familiar smell of cooking greeted her immediately. Of course, David appeared from the kitchen. Hey, hey, he pointed a spoon at her. Perfect timing. Why? Taste this. Before she could protest, he handed her a spoonful of sauce. Mary tasted it. Her eyes widened. That's good. David immediately frowned. You hesitated. It was half a second. You hesitated. David. The hesitation concerns me. She laughed. There may be too much basil. His eyes widened. Then he grabbed a notebook. Actually grabbed a notebook. Mary watched him write something down. You carry a notebook for cooking? Of course. You are impossible. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. David grinned. It usually is. The ease of the interaction settled around them like a familiar blanket. Comfortable. Safe. Normal. Too normal. That was becoming the problem. Mary had started wondering whether she wanted something more. Something different. And the more she wondered, the harder it became to ignore. You okay? David's question pulled her from her thoughts. Huh. You got quiet. I'm fine. He studied her. For a moment she thought he might push. Instead, he nodded. Okay. That was another thing about David. He never pressured people. He never demanded explanations. He simply waited until they were ready. Mary suddenly wanted to hug him. The realization startled her so badly she nearly dropped the spoon. What? David looked confused. What? She stood abruptly. Nothing. His confusion deepened. Mary. I should go. You've been here 6 minutes. I know. Did you break something? No. Are you being chased? No. Then why are you leaving? Because being near you is becoming increasingly dangerous. Thankfully she didn't say that. I'm busy. David stared. You're lying. Probably. Fair enough. She headed toward the door. Halfway there she turned around. David was back at the stove, focused entirely on his sauce, completely unaware that he was responsible for 90% of her current emotional crisis. The man was hopeless, utterly hopeless, and somehow impossibly lovable. The thought hit her so suddenly that she stopped walking. Lovable. Not handsome. Not nice. Not attractive. Lovable. Mary blinked. Then she quietly left before her brain could inflict any more revelations upon her. That night she lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. The evidence continued piling up. The jealousy, the worry, the constant thoughts, the way her pulse sped up whenever he smiled, the way she looked for excuses to spend time with him, the way losing him felt unimaginable. For years she'd searched for the perfect man while never once thinking about David. Now she was beginning to suspect that might have been the biggest mistake of her life. The truly frustrating part? David remained completely oblivious. As far as he knew, everything was exactly the same. Meanwhile, Mary felt like she was trying to rebuild an airplane while it was still flying. And somewhere across town, completely unaware of the emotional chaos he'd caused, David Bryant was making fresh pasta and wondering why Mary had suddenly become so weird. Chapter 4. A secret too big to hide. For the first time in his life, David Bryant had a secret worth keeping. Unfortunately, he had dramatically underestimated the abilities of his family. It started on a Tuesday afternoon when he signed the lease. Not for an apartment, not for an office, for a restaurant. His restaurant. David sat alone inside the empty building for nearly 10 minutes after signing the paperwork. The keys rested in his hand while sunlight streamed through the large front windows. The space wasn't glamorous. The floors needed work. Several walls needed fresh paint. The kitchen required upgrades. Half the dining area looked like it hadn't been redecorated since dinosaurs roamed the earth. To David, it was perfect. His heart hammered in his chest as he looked around. 20 years. 20 years of dreaming. 20 years of wondering. 20 years of telling himself it wasn't practical. And now suddenly it was real. The dream had walls. The dream had a kitchen. The dream had an address. A laugh escaped him. "Well, Grandma," the empty room answered with silence. "I guess we're doing this." He could almost hear her response anyway. "About time, kiddo." David smiled. The first person he called was his brother. The second oldest Bryant sibling. Jonathan Bryant. Attorney. Professional warrior. Destroyer of paperwork. Defender of all things legal. His older brother answered immediately. "Please tell me you've signed the lease." "I signed the lease." A victorious shout erupted through the phone. David held it away from his ear. "Holy, we're opening a restaurant." "We are not opening a restaurant." "Fine. You're opening a restaurant." "Correct. When can I start reviewing licenses?" David laughed. "You're enjoying this far too much. I'm a lawyer. This is our version of Disneyland. The paperwork isn't even finalized." Jonathan gasped dramatically. "Don't tease me like that." David hung up before his brother could become more excited. That turned out to be a mistake, because Jonathan spoke to their father later that night, and their father had all the self-restraint of an enthusiastic Labrador retriever, which meant by Wednesday morning the information had spread. Not intentionally, just efficiently. David's father told Mary's father during breakfast. Mary's father told Mary's mother during lunch. Mary's mother mentioned it to an aunt that afternoon. The aunt mentioned it to a cousin. The cousin told another cousin. The second cousin told an uncle. The uncle told another aunt. The aunt somehow learned additional details nobody actually knew. And by Thursday afternoon, roughly half the county appeared to know. Everyone except the one person David had intended to tell personally. Mary, who learned about it from her mother. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. The resulting reaction was immediate and loud. "What do you mean he's opening a restaurant?" Her mother looked up from the kitchen table. "Exactly what it sounds like." Mary blinked. "No. Honey, no." Her mother smiled. The smile of someone who knew chaos was approaching. "When was somebody planning to tell me? I thought you knew." "I obviously don't know." "Apparently not." Mary grabbed her purse. Her mother sighed. "Oh dear. How long has he known?" "A while." "How long is a while?" "Long enough to sign a lease." Mary stared, then pointed toward the door. "I'm going to yell at him. Try not to injure him." "No promises." 20 minutes later, Mary stormed into David's apartment. The spare key gave her immediate access. She didn't bother knocking. "David!" His voice drifted from the kitchen. "In here." She marched toward the sound. David stood at the counter chopping vegetables. A notebook sat nearby. 3 pots occupied the stove. The scene looked completely normal, which somehow made her more irritated. David glanced up. "Oh, hi." "No." He blinked. "What?" "No. That's not usually your greeting. You are opening a restaurant." There was a pause. Oh. He winced. "You found out." "Found out." Even David started laughing, which did not help. Not even a little. "Okay," he said. "Maybe sit down." "I don't want to sit down." "You look like you want to throw something." "I do want to throw something." "Maybe sit down first." Mary folded her arms. David wisely continued speaking. "I was going to tell you." "When?" "Soon." "When is soon?" David considered the question. That was also a mistake. Her eyes narrowed. "You don't know." "I had a rough estimate." "You had no estimate." "Fair." Mary stared at him. Then something unexpected happened. The anger faded, because now that she was looking at him, really looking at him, she noticed something. Excitement. Real excitement. The kind David rarely showed. His eyes were brighter. His posture lighter. He looked happy. Really happy. The realization softened her immediately. "When did this happen?" David finally smiled. "A few weeks ago. You bought a restaurant." "Leased." "You leased a restaurant." "Technically." "David." "Fine. Yes." The grin spreading across his face was impossible to miss. And suddenly Mary understood. This wasn't some random business investment. This was the dream. The dream. The one he'd never quite talked about directly. The one she'd heard pieces of for years. Better food. Affordable food. Family meals. Good ingredients. Good people. A place that felt welcoming. A place like his grandmother would have loved. Oh my God. David nodded. Yeah. You actually did it. I'm trying. No. She smiled. You did it. For a moment neither spoke. Then Mary crossed the room and hugged him. David nearly dropped a carrot. What was that? I'm proud of you. Oh. His voice softened. Thanks. Mary released him and took a step back. Then immediately pointed a finger at him. I'm still mad. Fair. You should have told me. Fair. You tell me everything. Usually. She narrowed her eyes. Why didn't you tell me? For the first time he looked genuinely uncomfortable. I didn't want to talk about it until I knew it would work. That answer immediately sounded like David. No grand announcement. No celebration. No attention. Just quiet work until success became real. Mary's irritation vanished completely. Idiot. Wonderful idiot. You know that's ridiculous. Probably. You still should have told me. I know. Good. David nodded. Good conversation. Not finished. Oh no. She pointed toward him again. You need help. I have help. No. Jonathan is helping with paperwork. I don't mean lawyer help. David paused. His expression grew suspicious. What kind of help? Mary smiled. The smile usually associated with future trouble. My help. Oh. You need someone helping with decorating. I can decorate. You absolutely cannot. David looked offended. I own furniture. Your couch is 3 different shades of gray. It evolved naturally. It faded. That's different. Mary ignored him. You need menu input. I already have menu ideas. You need taste testers. I have taste testers. You need organization. David actually laughed at that. Hard. Very hard. Rudely hard. Mary smacked his arm. What is so funny? You just claimed organization as one of your strengths. It is. You once lost your own purse. Only twice. Twice in one day. Details. David continued laughing. She hated that his laugh still made her smile. It was becoming a recurring problem. Finally he settled down. Okay. She blinked. Okay. Okay. What does that mean? It means okay. You'll let me help? David looked genuinely confused. Why wouldn't I? The question caught her off guard. He said it so naturally. As though there had never been another answer. As though her involvement was obvious. Expected. Wanted. Because to him it probably was. His expression softened. Mary. What? If I'm doing this, of course you're helping. Something warm spread through her chest. Dangerously warm. She was becoming increasingly familiar with that feeling. And increasingly bad at ignoring it. So that's a yes? It's a yes. She pumped a fist triumphantly. Excellent. David sighed. I feel like I just made a mistake. You absolutely did. His smile returned. And for the rest of the evening they sat at his kitchen table planning renovations, discussing ideas, arguing over paint colors and mapping out possibilities. Hours passed without either noticing. By the time Mary finally left, she realized something. This dream wasn't just exciting to David. She was excited too, because she got to watch him become exactly the person he'd always wanted to be. And somewhere deep inside, another realization was beginning to form. One that had nothing to do with restaurants. One that had everything to do with the man building one. The man she couldn't stop thinking about. The man who still had absolutely no idea what was happening to her. Chapter 5, Building Something Together. The next month became the busiest month of David Bryant's life. And somehow the happiest. His weekdays were still spent at the office. 9 to 5. Emails. Meetings. Spreadsheets. The steady, reliable job that paid his bills and never asked him to gamble on dreams. The moment work ended, however, his real day began. Every evening he drove straight to the restaurant. Every weekend belonged to renovations. The building slowly transformed from a tired old dining room into something that actually looked alive. Paint replaced stained walls. Worn furniture disappeared. New lighting went up. The kitchen equipment arrived piece by piece. David found himself smiling constantly. The dream was becoming real, one inspection, permit, and headache at a time. Not that he was doing it alone. That was the surprising part. Because once Mary had inserted herself into the project, she became completely unstoppable. She appeared at the restaurant nearly every day. Sometimes carrying coffee. Sometimes carrying takeout. Sometimes carrying supplies David hadn't even realized they needed. You know, David said one evening, normal people take weekends off. Mary looked up from a collection of paint samples. Normal people aren't opening restaurants. I'm not sure you count as part of the restaurant anymore. What does that mean? You've somehow taken over. She grinned. I prefer the term indispensable. David pointed toward a pile of decorative catalogs. That's excessive. It is necessary. There's a difference? No. David laughed. He had discovered a simple truth during the renovation process. Mary possessed opinions. Lots of opinions, especially when decorating. They stood in the dining room reviewing options for table arrangements. David preferred practicality. Mary preferred atmosphere. This disagreement had existed for 3 weeks. You need plants. We do not need plants. We absolutely need plants. They die. Only when neglected. David folded his arms. That seems like a design flaw. Mary stared. Then she started laughing. How do you function? Barely. Fortunately, she laughed at his jokes. Unfortunately, she laughed at them much harder lately. David wasn't entirely sure why. Recently she'd become different. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Sometimes he'd look up and find her staring at him. Then she'd immediately look away. Sometimes she'd grow quiet in the middle of conversations. Sometimes she'd blush. That was especially confusing. Mary almost never blushed. When he asked if something was wrong, she always denied it. At this point he had assumed it was stress. People were weird when stressed. That explanation made sense. Mostly, the families made everything worse. Not the project. The teasing. The endless, relentless teasing. One Saturday afternoon both families gathered to see the renovation progress. This turned out to be a terrible idea. David's father walked into the dining room and looked around approvingly. Nice place. Thanks. Mary's father nodded. Looks good. Still needs a lot of work. Then both fathers simultaneously looked at David and Mary standing together. The smiles appeared instantly. David recognized those smiles. They meant trouble. Oh no. What? Mary asked. David pointed. Them. The two fathers were already whispering. A moment later both mothers joined them. Then an aunt. Then a cousin. Then another aunt. The whispering spread. Like a disease. Mary narrowed her eyes. What are they doing? You don't want to know. I do. No. 5 minutes later they found out anyway. Mary's aunt approached first. Such a cute place. Thank you, David said. Perfect size. Mary nodded. That's the hope. The aunt smiled. And plenty of room for a wedding reception someday. Silence. David closed his eyes. Mary nearly choked. Across the room someone snorted. Another relative failed to hide a laugh. The aunt looked completely innocent. The performance deserved awards. Aunt Linda. What? You know exactly what. I haven't said anything. You absolutely said something. The woman walked away smiling. David shook his head. They're all insane. Mary laughed. A little. A little? Okay, very. At least they suffered together. That had become a recurring theme in life. 3 weeks before opening day, the menu finally became the primary focus. This was David's favorite part. The kitchen served as command central. Recipe cards covered every available surface. Mary sat on a stool while David worked. And this one, she tasted the sample he offered. Holy crap. Good. That's not fair. What? Everything tastes good. David grinned. Years of experimenting had given him confidence. Not arrogance. Confidence. There was a difference. He knew his food was good. The challenge was deciding which dishes deserved a place on the menu. This one stays, Mary declared. David made a note. Next. This feels less like helping and more like eating. Both can be true. Mary happily accepted another sample. You're using me. A little. Worth it. By the end of the evening, they had narrowed dozens of possibilities into a manageable list. The dining room was dark except for a few overhead lights. Most of the workers had gone home hours earlier. The building felt quiet. Comfortable. They sat alone reviewing final notes. Mary looked around. I can't believe this is actually happening. David followed her gaze. Neither could he. Not completely. Every day he expected someone to arrive and explain there had been a mistake. That dreams like this didn't happen to people like him. Yet here he sat. Inside his restaurant. Planning opening day. It's weird. Mary smiled. You earned it. I'm not sure about that. David. He looked over. The seriousness in her expression caught him off guard. You earned every bit of this. The certainty in her voice struck deeper than she probably realized. Because Mary didn't hand out praise casually. When she believed something, she meant it. David smiled. Thanks. Neither spoke for a moment. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It never was. Finally David stood and stretched. His back immediately protested. He groaned. I've reached the age where standing up is an athletic event. Oh no. It's tragic. You poor thing. I need sympathy. You need ibuprofen. That's less romantic. The word slipped into the conversation without thought. David barely noticed it. Mary did. Immediately. Completely. Her head snapped toward him. David remained oblivious. He grabbed 2 bottles of water from the refrigerator. You know, he said casually, handing one to her. All this work is definitely earning you free meals. Mary laughed. Good. I mean it. I know. You'll never need a reservation. Perks of friendship. Exactly. He took a drink before adding the statement that seemed completely natural to him. The simplest truth in the world. You know, I'll always cook for you. The moment the words left his mouth, Mary went utterly still. David frowned. What? She stared at him. For several seconds she didn't answer. Then she looked away. Nothing. He recognized that tone. It definitely wasn't nothing. Mary. I'm fine. That sounded important. Nope. It really did. Mary stood abruptly. I should go. David blinked. Again. That was becoming a trend. His best friend had apparently developed a habit of fleeing conversations. You do realize that's suspicious, right? Good night, David. Mary. She was already heading toward the door. Halfway there she stopped, turned, and looked back at him. Something emotional flashed briefly across her face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Then she smiled. A small, soft smile. Good night. The door closed behind her. David stood alone in the kitchen, confused. You'll always cook for her. He shrugged. Of course he would. Mary was Mary. That wasn't exactly a shocking statement. Still, her reaction lingered in his thoughts long after she left. Meanwhile, Mary sat in her car gripping the steering wheel. Her heart refused to slow down, because she had heard that sentence differently than she would have a few months ago. You know, I'll always cook for you. To David, it had been casual, natural, a promise made without thinking. To Mary, it sounded like something far more dangerous. It sounded like forever. And for the first time, she realized she very much wanted forever to include her. Chapter 6. The Girl with Terrible Timing. Mary decided that she was going to tell David the truth. It was a good plan. Simple, direct, mature. Unfortunately, reality seemed personally offended by the idea. Every attempt failed, spectacularly. The first attempt happened on a Tuesday evening. Mary had spent the entire day rehearsing. She wasn't planning some dramatic declaration. She wasn't expecting violins and fireworks. She simply wanted to sit down and say the words, David, I think I love you. That was all. Simple, reasonable, completely achievable. She arrived at the restaurant determined to finally get it over with. David was alone in the dining room assembling chairs. Perfect. No distractions. No interruptions. No excuses. Her heartbeat immediately doubled. Idiot. Just say it. Hey. David looked up. Hey. Busy. A little. I need to talk to you. Okay. His expression became concerned. Everything all right? Yes. No. Maybe. David sighed. That's not reassuring. She took a deep breath. Now was the moment. Then the front door opened. A delivery driver entered carrying 3 massive boxes. Bryant. David raised a hand. That's me. Mary watched her opportunity vanish. 30 minutes later, they were discussing refrigerator placement. The moment was dead. Attempt 1 failed. Attempt 2 happened 2 days later. She cornered him at his apartment. This time she arrived prepared. No distractions. No audience. No escape routes. David answered the door holding a mixing bowl. Hi. Hi. Why do you look nervous? I don't look nervous. You absolutely do. She pushed past him before he could continue. The familiar smell of baking greeted her immediately. What's that? Sourdough. Of course it is. David disappeared into the kitchen. Mary followed. This was manageable. She could do this. She had survived job interviews, public speaking, college finals. She could tell one man she loved him, especially when that man was David, the easiest person in the world to talk to, which somehow made everything harder. David. I need to tell you something. He turned. Finally, the moment had arrived. Then his smoke detector started screaming. The bread had not survived. For the next 10 minutes David ran around opening windows while muttering things about betrayal and oven temperatures. Mary laughed so hard she cried. Attempt 2 failed. Attempt 3 was actually going well. Suspiciously well. That should have been another warning. The restaurant was only a week away from opening. Most of the major work was finished. The dining room looked beautiful. Warm lighting, polished tables, fresh paint. The place finally felt alive. David stood in the kitchen reviewing inventory. Mary leaned against a counter. They were alone again. A miracle. David. He looked up. Yeah. Her pulse immediately accelerated. Why did her body keep doing that? She knew this man. She'd known him longer than she'd known anyone outside her family. You know how we've been friends forever? His face immediately brightened. Oh no. What? That's usually the beginning of a horrible conversation. It is not. It absolutely is. She laughed. Will you let me finish? Proceed. Mary took a breath. Then another. Then another. This was ridiculous. Just talk. I'm serious. His smile softened. Okay. The kindness in his voice nearly derailed her all by itself, because it was always there. The patience, the attention, the simple willingness to listen. Every quality she'd spent years searching for in other men. All standing right in front of her. David. The kitchen door burst open. Plumber entered. Found the leak. Mary closed her eyes. The universe hated her. By the end of the week she had accumulated 6 failed attempts. 6. At this point she was starting to suspect divine intervention. David remained blissfully unaware. In his defense, he was busy. Opening a restaurant turned out to involve approximately 4 million decisions. He spent most of his time juggling inspections, staffing, menus, suppliers, and equipment deliveries. The stress should have overwhelmed him. Instead, he looked energized, exhausted, but energized. Mary loved seeing it. Every success made him smile. Every completed project brought him closer to his dream. And watching that happiness made her love him even more. Not that she had told him, because apparently she was incapable of completing a sentence. Saturday afternoon delivered an entirely different problem. One named Jackie. The restaurant was closed for the day. David sat alone in the dining room reviewing receipts when the front door opened. He looked up. "Jackie," she smiled. "Hey, didn't know you were coming by. I was nearby." David gestured toward a chair. "Have a seat." Jackie sat. For a while they talked. Nothing unusual. Recipes. The restaurant. Friends. Life. David genuinely enjoyed talking with her. She was smart. Funny. Easy company. A lot like Mary in some ways. The thought barely registered. Then Jackie surprised him. "Would you like to go out sometime?" David blinked. Oh, a moment passed. Not because he disliked the idea. Mostly because he hadn't been expecting it. Jackie laughed nervously. "You don't have to sound that shocked." "No." David smiled. "Sorry." She waited. David considered the question. The answer seemed straightforward. He liked her. She was attractive. Kind. Interesting. Most people would call that a good reason to say yes. "Sure." Jackie smiled. "Really? Really?" Their first date was scheduled before she left. Simple. Easy. Normal. David didn't think much about it afterward. He certainly didn't expect it to become important. 3 hours later Mary arrived carrying folders. She found David reorganizing recipe binders. "Good news." He looked up. "What's the good news?" "I finally got those vendor quotes." "Excellent." She set them on the counter. Then noticed his expression. "You look happy." "I am happy." Mary smiled. "Good." She liked seeing him happy. "What happened?" David answered without hesitation. "Jackie asked me out." The smile disappeared. Immediately, David frowned. "You all right?" "Yep." The word emerged far too fast, far too high, far too fake. Every alarm in David's brain activated. "You don't sound all right." "I'm fine." "You really don't." Mary looked away. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Jackie. Of course. Of course Jackie had made a move. Why wouldn't she? Mary had spent weeks hesitating. Weeks overthinking. Weeks finding reasons to wait. Someone else had simply acted. And David had said yes. A sharp ache settled in her chest. The realization was immediate. Painfully immediate. She might have waited too long. "Mary." His voice softened. "What's wrong?" She forced a smile. The kind that took actual effort. "Nothing." "You're lying." "Probably." David studied her. Concern filled his expression. The concern nearly made everything worse. Because that was the problem. David cared. Always had. But caring wasn't necessarily love. And now someone else was moving into the space she'd always assumed would remain hers. Not romantically, just emotionally, comfortably, permanently. The thought terrified her. "Seriously," David said. "What's going on?" She almost told him. Right there. The words nearly escaped. "I love you." I should have said something. "Don't go." Instead she swallowed them. Again. "I'm just tired." David looked unconvinced. But after a moment he nodded. "Okay." Mary hated herself a little. Because she knew exactly what had happened. She'd spent so much time trying to be certain that she'd forgotten one important fact. Life didn't wait. And neither did opportunities. That night she lay awake staring at her ceiling. For the first time since this entire disaster had started, real fear settled into her heart. Not confusion. Not uncertainty. Fear. Because David was going on a date. And the possibility that he might find happiness with someone else hurt far more than she wanted to admit. Across town, David was trying to decide where to take Jackie for dinner. Completely unaware that the woman he had loved for most of his life had almost told him the truth. Again. And completely unaware that every missed opportunity was bringing them both closer to a collision neither of them would be able to avoid much longer. Chapter 7, Recipes and Heartbreak. David's first date with Jackie was pleasant. That was the problem. It wasn't bad. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't a disaster. It was pleasant. They met at a small Italian restaurant 2 towns over. David had insisted on picking a place he didn't know the owner of. Apparently opening a restaurant meant unexpectedly knowing far too many people in food service. Jackie arrived smiling. David arrived 5 minutes early. The food was good. The conversation was good. The evening was good. Everything was good. And yet something felt missing. David couldn't have explained it if someone asked. He wasn't comparing Jackie to anyone. At least not consciously. She was funny, smart, kind. She genuinely seemed interested in him. For years his friends had insisted he should date more. Now he was. So why did something feel off? He dismissed the feeling. Not every date was supposed to feel like a movie. Real life wasn't like that. By the end of the evening they agreed to see each other again. Simple. Reasonable. Normal. David drove home feeling satisfied. Mostly. The following morning he called Mary. As usual. He didn't think about it. He simply did. She answered immediately. Morning. Morning. How'd the date go? The question sounded casual. Almost casual. Pretty good. Mary's heart sank. That's nice. David leaned against his kitchen counter. It was. What did you do? Dinner. And what? You've never been on many dates. David laughed. You make it sound like I'm some kind of rare animal. Answer the question. It went well. Mary wanted details. She immediately hated herself for wanting details. So you like her? David thought about it. Yeah. The answer hurt. Far more than it should. Good. You don't sound convinced. I'm happy for you. That sounds suspiciously like a hostage statement. Despite everything, Mary laughed. It was impossible not to. David always knew exactly how to make her laugh. And somehow that made everything worse. After they ended the call, she sat quietly on her couch. The apartment suddenly felt very empty. She stared at her phone, then at the wall, then at the phone again. This was awful, officially awful, maybe even catastrophically awful, because she finally knew exactly how she felt. There was no uncertainty anymore, no confusion, no questions. She loved David, completely, and she might have realized it too late. Meanwhile, David threw himself into opening week preparations. The restaurant was only days away from opening. Every waking hour seemed occupied. Deliveries arrived. Staff training continued. Menus were finalized. Suppliers called constantly. His brother showed up carrying more paperwork than any human should legally possess. I'm beginning to suspect you enjoy this. Jonathan grinned. I absolutely enjoy this. You need hobbies. This is my hobby. You're a disturbing individual, yet somehow successful. David hated that argument because it kept working. Several hours later Mary arrived. As she had nearly every day for weeks, David immediately felt relieved. The realization didn't register. It should have. Instead he simply smiled. Hey. She looked tired. More tired than usual. You okay? I'm fine. David narrowed his eyes. You keep saying that. Because it's true. You are a terrible liar. Mary rolled her eyes. Focus on your restaurant. I can do both. She smiled softly. The expression lingered for a second longer than normal. Then it disappeared. Lately she'd been doing that too. Smiling at him strangely. Looking at him strangely. Acting strangely. David still had absolutely no idea why. Jackie and David went on 3 more dates. Each one was pleasant, comfortable, enjoyable. David genuinely liked spending time with her, which only made the problem harder to identify, because nothing was actually wrong. A week later they sat together in a coffee shop. Jackie stirred her drink while studying him. Eventually she laughed. David looked up. What? You know, you're incredibly dense. He blinked. That's a mean thing to say. It isn't. It felt mean. It was accurate. David pointed at her. I reject this entirely. Jackie laughed. Of course you do. A moment passed. Then she leaned back in her chair. Can I ask you something? Sure. When something good happens, who's the first person you want to tell? David answered immediately. Mary. Jackie smiled. Not because she was happy about the answer, because she'd expected it. What about bad news? Also Mary. What about when you're stressed? Mary. When you're excited? Mary. When you're worried? David opened his mouth, paused, then frowned. Oh. Jackie nodded. Yeah. A very uncomfortable realization began forming. His stomach dropped slightly. Oh. Jackie laughed softly. You really didn't know. The sentence died, because suddenly he was reviewing months of memories. No, years. Mary helping with the restaurant. Mary showing up whenever he needed her. Mary being the first person he looked for in any crowded room. Mary being the person he wanted to celebrate with. Mary being the person he wanted to complain to. Mary. Always Mary. Jackie watched the realization happen in real time. The poor man looked like someone had hit him with a folding chair. Oh wow, David said quietly. Yep. He rubbed a hand across his face. This is bad. It really isn't. I took you on 4 dates. We took each other on 4 dates. Still. Jackie smiled. David. He looked up. I knew something was weird after the second one. You did. You smiled differently when you talk about her. His eyes widened. Apparently everyone was seeing things he wasn't. Again. Jackie shook her head. Honestly, I'm a little impressed. By what? Everybody knew except the both of you. David laughed. A helpless, shocked laugh. Because that sounded ridiculous, and somehow entirely believable. I'm an idiot. A little. A lot. Jackie nodded. Definitely a lot. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally David sighed. I'm sorry. For what? For wasting your time. Jackie smiled. You didn't. You sure? I like you. David relaxed slightly. But your heart was somewhere else before I ever showed up. The truth of that statement landed heavily. Not because it hurt, because it was accurate. Painfully accurate. Every important memory in his life somehow involved Mary. Every dream, every success, every failure. She was everywhere. Had always been everywhere. And somehow he'd convinced himself that was normal. That friendship explained all of it. Now he wasn't so sure. Actually, he was very sure. And that certainty terrified him. Because if he was right, then there was another possibility. One he hardly dared consider. What if he'd been wrong about Mary all these years? That evening David found himself walking through the restaurant alone. Opening day was tomorrow. Tomorrow. The thought barely seemed real. The dining room looked beautiful. Warm. Welcoming. Exactly what he had envisioned. Families would be sitting here soon. Children. Parents. Grandparents. People sharing meals together. The dream had become reality. Yet his thoughts weren't on the restaurant. They kept returning to Mary. To every memory. Every conversation. Every laugh. Every moment. Somewhere during all those years she'd become essential to his life. Not because he needed her. Because he wanted her there. There was a difference. A huge difference. And suddenly he wasn't sure how he'd missed it. Then another thought appeared. One that made his pulse quicken. What if she didn't feel the same? For years he'd accepted that possibility. Made peace with it. Buried it. Now it was back. And somehow more frightening than it had ever been before. Tomorrow the restaurant would open. His dream would finally come true. But for the first time in his life, another possibility seemed just as important. And David Bryant was finally beginning to understand exactly what was at stake. Chapter 8. The one thing he never saw. Opening day arrived on a bright Saturday morning. David Bryant woke up at 5:30 despite setting his alarm for 7. He stared at his ceiling for several seconds, then sat upright, then immediately realized there was absolutely no chance he was getting back to sleep. Today was the day. After years of dreaming, months of planning, weeks of renovations, countless recipes, endless paperwork, an unreasonable number of inspections. Today his restaurant would open. David arrived before sunrise. The dining room sat empty and quiet. Tables waited patiently beneath warm lights. Clean glasses reflected the morning sunlight. Fresh flowers decorated the center of every table. The kitchen gleamed. For a long moment he simply stood there, taking it all in. His throat tightened unexpectedly. This was real. Actually real. He thought of his grandmother. Of wooden spoons and flower-covered counters. Of every lesson she'd taught him. Every joke. Every hug. Every terrible pun. "We made it, Grandma." His voice echoed softly through the empty room. A smile touched his face. Then he rolled up his sleeves. There was work to do. The restaurant opened at 11. By 11:15 every table was occupied. By noon there was a waiting list. David barely had time to breathe. The kitchen became organized chaos. Orders flew in. Food flew out. Staff rushed from station to station. People laughed. Families talked. Children pointed excitedly at desserts. The dining room buzzed with life. Everything David had imagined. And somehow even better. Several times throughout the day, he caught glimpses of Mary helping wherever she was needed. Greeting customers. Answering questions. Moving supplies. Solving problems. She wasn't technically an employee. Nobody would have guessed that. She moved through the restaurant as naturally as if she'd belonged there from the beginning. Maybe she did. The thought appeared unexpectedly. Then disappeared just as quickly. Because there wasn't time to think. Not today. Today belonged to the dream. By 9 that evening the final customers had left. The doors were locked. The staff had gone home. The restaurant fell quiet. David sank into a chair. Every muscle in his body complained. His feet were threatening legal action. He'd never been happier. A round of applause broke the silence. David looked up. Mary stood near the counter, still clapping. The sound echoed through the empty dining room. "You did it." A grin spread across his face. "We did it." "No." She shook her head. "You did." David looked around the room. The emotion he'd been holding back all day threatened to overwhelm him. "It worked. It worked. People actually came." Mary laughed. "David, there was a line halfway down the block." "I know. You sold out." "I know. You almost cried when the first family sat down." "I absolutely did not." "You absolutely did." David pointed at her. "There are no witnesses." "I'm a witness." "Unreliable." She laughed. God, he loved that laugh. The thought arrived without warning. Without hesitation. Without doubt. Loved. Not cared about. Not appreciated. Loved. The certainty hit him like a freight train. Every conversation with Jackie came rushing back. Every realization. Every memory. Every moment. And standing across from him was the woman at the center of all of them. Mary. Always Mary. His stomach twisted. Because now he had a problem. A massive problem. What if he was wrong? What if she'd never seen him that way? What if he'd ruined everything by finally admitting the truth? The friendship mattered more than anything. More than his pride. More than his feelings. More than himself. The silence stretched. Mary noticed. "You okay?" David looked at her. Really looked. And suddenly he was tired of pretending. Tired. That's fair. No. He swallowed. Not just tired. Something in his voice made her expression change. What is it? The moment had arrived. Years late, but finally here. And David had absolutely no idea how to start. We need to talk. Mary almost laughed. The irony nearly killed her, because she'd been trying to have that conversation for weeks. Okay. He rubbed a hand over his face, then immediately said the worst possible opening sentence. Jackie broke up with me. Mary blinked. What? It was mutual. That wasn't the conversation she had expected. Okay. She called me an idiot. Mary immediately smiled. Honestly, that's fair. David pointed at her. See? That's what she said. I'm starting to like Jackie. Despite himself, David laughed. The tension eased slightly. Then he looked down at the table. I think she was right. Mary's heart began pounding. Hard. About what? David looked up. Directly at her. About me being an idiot. The world seemed to slow down. Every instinct told Mary exactly where this conversation was headed. Finally, after all this time, after all these years, David nodded slowly. Apparently there was something important I wasn't seeing. Her pulse thundered in her ears. David. He smiled nervously. The sight nearly broke her heart, because she'd never seen him nervous around her before. Not once. Not in 25 years. I spent most of my life thinking you weren't interested. Mary stared, then blinked, then stared some more. What? That's why I never said anything. Her entire brain stopped functioning. David. I didn't want to lose you. David. You were always more important than. David. He stopped talking. Finally, Mary stared at him in disbelief, then began laughing, completely laughing, the kind that stole breath. David looked confused, which only made her laugh harder. What? You? He pointed at himself. Me? Yes, you. I don't understand. Clearly, the answer slipped out before she could stop it. David narrowed his eyes. That's ominous. Mary took a breath, then another. No interruptions this time. No plumbers. No smoke alarms. No delivery drivers. Just them. Finally. You really thought I wasn't interested? David nodded. Reasonable conclusion. It's a terrible conclusion. You never said anything. Mary actually groaned. Neither did you. Fair. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat. Then Mary smiled. A real smile. The kind she'd been holding back for months. I love you, you idiot. David froze. Completely froze. For a moment she wondered if he'd forgotten how breathing worked. Then he laughed. A single shocked laugh. What? I love you. His eyes widened. You do. Mary stared. Seriously. I just want to verify. She reached over and grabbed the front of his shirt. Then kissed him. 25 years vanished instantly. All the confusion. All the missed opportunities. All the fear. Gone. When they finally pulled apart, neither could stop smiling. David shook his head. You know what's embarrassing? I'm afraid to ask. I thought I was hiding this really well. Mary burst out laughing. Oh, sweetheart. His eyebrow rose. That was new. Oh, sweetheart. My parents knew. David groaned. Of course they did. Your parents knew. They definitely knew. My aunts knew. My brother knew. My dog probably knew. You don't have a dog. Exactly. Mary laughed so hard she nearly cried. Eventually the laughter faded. The smiles remained. David looked around the restaurant. His restaurant. Then back at Mary. The woman he'd loved most of his life. The woman who somehow loved him back. His dream had come true today. Not one dream, two. And somehow he wasn't sure which miracle felt bigger. He reached for her hand. She squeezed it immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just certainty. Finally. At long last. The one thing David Bryant had never seen had been standing right in front of him the entire time. And now that he saw it, he couldn't imagine how he'd ever missed it. Epilogue reserved for family. 4 years later, the restaurant was closed. That fact alone would have surprised most people. The little family restaurant David Bryant had opened 4 years earlier was famous locally for one thing besides good food. It was almost always busy. Families filled the dining room nearly every evening. Regular customers had favorite tables. Children who had once needed booster seats now walked in and greeted staff by name. Retirees argued over coffee. Teenagers celebrated dates. Birthday parties regularly occupied half the dining room on weekends. It had become exactly what David had dreamed about. Good food. Reasonable prices. A place where people felt welcome. A place where families gathered. A place where nobody needed a special occasion to enjoy a great meal. The business had grown steadily every year. Not because David chased trends, because people liked the food. He still experimented constantly. Customers had learned to expect occasional menu additions. A new soup, a different pasta, a healthier version of an old favorite. One memorable month had featured 6 different attempts at reinventing shepherd's pie. 3 of them had been excellent. 2 had been decent. One had nearly started a riot among the regulars. David had considered that valuable feedback. Today, however, the restaurant sat dark and quiet. A handwritten sign hung on the front door. Closed for a family wedding. Very few people complained. Most already knew who was getting married. After all, Jackie and Jonathan Bryant had become something of a local success story. At least according to their mothers. Actually, according to everyone, including Jackie and Jonathan. Because 4 years ago, David had introduced a woman he genuinely liked to a brother he genuinely liked. The result had been immediate chaos. Jonathan had called David after his second date. "I hate you." David had blinked. "Why?" "I think I'm going to marry her." The wedding had been scheduled 11 months later. Life simply got busy before they finally reached the altar. Apparently lawyers and event planners were both very good at creating paperwork. The reception occupied a large event hall outside town. Music drifted through the room. Guests laughed. Children chased each other between tables. Aunts danced with uncles. Grandparents told stories. It felt comfortable. Familiar. Like family. Because at this point, everyone largely was family. David adjusted his tie and looked around the room. "Think anyone would notice if we snuck out?" Mary appeared beside him instantly. "No." "Really?" "No." Hope appeared, then vanished. "Because your mother would hunt us down." "That's fair." Mary laughed. For years later, and the sound still made him smile automatically. Some things never changed. Other things had changed dramatically. For example, his wife still stole fries from his plate. His wife still knew exactly what he was thinking most of the time. His wife still occupied entirely too much of his attention. The word wife still made him ridiculously happy. 5 months after the restaurant had opened, they stopped pretending they needed a long engagement. Everyone laughed when they announced the wedding. Not because people were surprised. Because people were surprised it had taken them that long. David's father had actually said, "Finally." Then most of the room agreed. Mary still insisted that had been rude. David still thought it was funny. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "There you are." Jonathan approached, wearing the expression of a very happy man. Jackie walked beside him. Her wedding dress was elegant and simple. Jonathan looked like he'd won the lottery, which, to be fair, he probably thought he had. Jackie smiled. "We've been looking for you." David pointed toward himself. "Me? And me?" Mary added. "Both of you." Jonathan nodded. "We need a minute." Mary exchanged a glance with David. "That sounded suspicious." "What did we do?" David asked. "Nothing." "That sounds even more suspicious." Jackie laughed. Then her expression softened. "Actually, we wanted to thank you." David blinked. "For what?" Jonathan stared at him. "You introduced us." "Oh." The simple truth was he hadn't thought much about it. Jackie was good people. Jonathan was good people. The match had seemed obvious. Apparently everyone in the family was becoming matchmaking experts. Jackie folded her arms. "You know, I almost didn't ask you out." David grinned. "That would have changed things." "A little." Jonathan nodded. "A lot." Mary slipped her hand into David's. The simple gesture felt natural. Comfortable. Home. Jackie smiled at both of them. "Seriously." She squeezed Jonathan's arm. "Thank you." Jonathan nodded. "I know people joke about fate and destiny." David immediately looked worried. "Oh no. Relax. I've heard that tone before." The lawyer ignored him. "I just mean things worked out pretty well." David looked at the couple. At his brother. At Jackie. Then at Mary. His wife smiled back. The same smile that had greeted him for almost his entire life. The same smile that still somehow made his day better. "Yeah," David said quietly. "I'd say they did." A voice suddenly shouted from across the room. "David!" He cringed. "Your mother found us." Mary laughed. Jackie laughed. Jonathan looked resigned. Some things transcended weddings. One of those things was a Bryant mother locating her children. "Photos," came the command. Everybody groaned. Nobody argued. Because that was how family worked. As they followed the summons toward the photographer, David glanced around the room one last time. The restaurant was thriving. His dream had become reality. Mary was beside him. Jonathan and Jackie had found each other. Both families had somehow become even closer than before. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Really good. And as Mary slipped her arm through his, David found himself smiling. Because years ago he had dreamed about feeding families. What he hadn't realized was that he'd been building one of his own the entire time.